Hello, my name is Jeffrey Patron, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about green spots, the history of Mitchell Sons, and a little bit about whiskey bonding in Ireland and the history of Irish whiskey. Except that's not entirely true. I'm actually going to be talking about red spot, the 15-year-old expression by the Spot Whiskey, company, by Mitchell Sons, a brand that was revitalized and relaunched last year, 2018, almost 50 years after being discontinued. I already have some poured in a Copa Capita glass, a really good fancy glass for nosing whiskey. I believe it was specifically designed for sherry glasses. But yeah, um, if you want to if you are only here for the review section of this video, I will leave a timestamp, but there's a lot of boring stuff to go through, all the while nosing this glorious Irish whiskey. And I would like to say before I start, practically every Irish whiskey is a great smelling whiskey. I'm a big fan of the shortbread cookie kind of note, even though it is not as apparent in red spots compared to others. So, let's sit in our comfy chairs, lean back. If you have a cigar or a pipe or a vape or a dab pen, or even a nice cigarette. Here's the story of Mitchell Sons. Yeah, too cheesy. So, the Mitchell family originally were not involved in the whiskey business, and in fact, they only owned a shop that sold tea, confectionaries, and cakes in Dublin, Ireland. And the shop itself opened in 1805, and eventually they grew to such fame and renown that they became known as Confectioner to Her Majesty, which I believe was Queen Victoria. So it's at least a few decades into this, but I could not find a concrete kind of date. In the 1880s, 1887 I believe, is when they opened a second location and also ventured into whiskey bonding and also the wine business, as far as I can tell. Empty sherry barrels would be sent to the Jameson distillery on Bow Street, which is where they were originally located, and distillate from Jameson would be taken, and 50% of it would be aged in darker sherry barrels like Oloroso, and 50% of it would be aged in lighter sherries like Fino, and they would be aged in those two lighter and darker sherry barrels for 5 years before spending 5 years together in a marrying vat of neutral oak, which probably might have been Ex-Bourbon, but I could be wrong. The history, at least the history on the practices of the company, do not seem to be as specific and pinpointed as I would like. Perhaps it's in a book that I should possibly read. So, so you would get a total of 10 years. And, they've had a lot of different ways of how they've made whiskey, or at least how they age it themselves. But they really came to some, prominence because of, they got some really good whiskey from Jameson. They would age it themselves, starting in sherry, and they got a following. And eventually they would release their whiskey as Pat Whiskey. And then eventually, I believe in the 1930s, they released it as John Jameson and Son 10-Year-Old Green Seal. But the thing that I think is most recognizable about them is when they shifted into spot whiskey. And at one point in time, they had 4 different brands. Blue Spot, which was a 7-year-old, Green Spot, which was a 10-year-old, Yellow Spot, which was a 12-year-old, and Red Spot, which was a 15-year-old. Now, on each of these, on the cask that the whiskey was being housed in, a colored spot would be left on the barrel to note, what whiskey it was, or how long it was supposed to be aged in. Even this, I'm still not 100% certain on how they used to do it, which that's just me being a dumbass. However, if you're not familiar with the history of Irish whiskey, over time, a lot of, not necessarily mistakes, but a lot of business decisions kind of all amounted together, along with some things like the Irish potato famine, just kind of a lot of kind of geopolitical issues in Ireland as well, to a degree. But also Prohibition in America, where the Irish were less involved in, like, sending whiskey over here. There's a famous myth of, what's his name? Kennedy's father coming to Ireland, and basically being like, hey, can we maybe smuggle some stuff and then getting told no, going to Scotland, and that is how Cutty Sark got started, essentially. But Ireland was generally like, no. And over time, this resulted in a more insulated, we're not going to ship whiskey anywhere, we're going to keep it in-house. And eventually, Irish people may like whiskey, but it's not enough to, like, sustain a global market if you're limiting yourself primarily to one country. So, in 1971, the Bow Street Jameson location closed, and production of Jameson, the source of spot whiskey, was moved to New Middleton Distillery, which is where spot whiskey moved their sourcings to. Around this time is when the brands start dropping like flies. Blue Spot is discontinued, Yellow Spot is discontinued, and Red Spot is discontinued. And the only thing that stays in continual production is Green Spot, which even still loses its age statement and is now a blend of 7 to 10-year-old whiskey, and is bottled at 40%. And even with that, it wasn't until 2014 that Green Spot actually got, like, broad distribution to America. So 5 years ago, you might not have even been able to find Green Spot. That was kind of how hard it is. And that's kind of the case with a lot of Irish whiskey. They keep it in the country, and you will never be able to have any of it. However, in recent years, production is going up. There seems to be more of an interest in Irish whiskey because of a broader, heightened interest in whiskey. And you have a lot of interesting things going on in Irish whiskey. And by 2012, you have the return of Yellow Spot, which I have right here. And it returned as a 12-year-old product, as something that was like the traditional Green Spot is now, aged in ex-Bourbon and ex-Sherry barrels, except it was then finished in Italian fortified wine Malaga barrels. And, it's an impressive return. They didn't skimp on the proof. It is at 46%. And it's not bad, but it's not great for the price point it's at, I would argue. So last year, as I said, 2018, Red Spot did finally return. And it returns as a 15-year-old product, aged in ex-bourbon, ex-sherry, and... Wait, no, sorry. I got that wrong. Malaga is a Spanish wine, and Marsala is an Italian wine. Sorry. It may even be Sicilian. I'm so off. But yeah. 15 years old, 46%. Now, there's also 2 special editions of Green Spot currently available, one of which I do have the Bordeaux finish. And it is, so there's, the 2 ones are Green Spot, Chateau, Levet Barton, which was finished for up to 18 months in Bordeaux casks. And then there's Chateau Montelena, word salad, which was finished for up to a year, 12 months, in French oak Zinfandel casks. And the interesting thing with the one that I have, the Bordeaux finish, is that it is an Irish-owned vineyard in France. So you have all of these things of celebrating a shared Irish history, heritage, and you actually have this really informative package which lists specific years and dates, and is the history of Mitchel Sons, as well as this wine, this winery, which is really interesting, and the history of so-called wine geese. So yeah, if you're into history, check out this whiskey. But yeah, it is, Red Spot at least, a very nice dram. And I do have a range of prices below that I'll go into later, but let's go into some of the tasting notes that I've listed. The thing with all Irish whiskey is, as friendly as it is, sometimes there is an astringent quality to the nose if you linger too long, which is a real pain in the ass because it's such a great kind of creamy nose. But if you really want to, especially if your throat's bothering you, it'll go very quickly to astringent qualities. But of course, the key thing to me when you're doing a review like this, prepare some notes beforehand, but, you know, make sure you have some water to keep yourself on point and make sure you don't get clogged up. But side tangent over. Yeah, very kind of creamy, vanilla-y. Almost like I get a little bit of like a vanilla custard pie with like a real classic kind of like crumb shell that you would find at like a diner. Some green apple. I would characterize like a separate appleish note in the ballpark of like freshly cut apple skin. Grain cereal, almost like whole wheat Cheerios almost. Like you smell it and you can almost picture heart healthy right on the cereal box. Beeswax and kind of like a lip balm, not lip balm, like chapstick almost. I've sometimes characterized this note as being almost like clay. A little bit of new leather, but it's not new leather and like it's a green funky wood new leather. It's not funky. I don't know why my brain's going to this, but I'm almost getting like a warm moleskin notebook with you have it open and you can kind of like smell the moleskin, um, which I'm not even sure if that's a thing, but this is what popped into my head. You have it open, you can smell like the paper, and you can also smell like the ink as it's drying. Which it's a common thing for me. Anytime you have something like really sherry heavy, or even like just that it's a prominent part of it, I get almost like, I call it like octopus ink, or just like pen ink from it. Little oak. Not so much now, but I've definitely gotten it before. I've gotten caramel. Wait, no, no, now that I've said it, uh-huh. I'm now getting caramel actually, and it's slightly like dusty almost. Cooked fruits, or at like mashed kind of like fruits, like you're making a jam or something. Strawberries, black currant, boysenberry, if you would. I've seen this note come up a lot, but it's generally rendered as stewed fruits. I don't really have a mental connection with stewed fruits, but I've definitely tried to make my own jams before. Tried and succeeded. And they were damn good jams. I'm going to start with the finish because something new just popped out. I'm getting, as the pepperiness kind of fades away, almost like the feeling of fresh cut grass. So, through and through with this whiskey, I've experienced this very interesting kind of like journey of flavors. And for me, consistently, pretty much, this time included, it starts vanilla-y and custardy, loses the custard almost immediately, gets very bright, slightly acidic, like almost like a lemon oil, orange oil, kind of like this, like the peel, before going into like this brittle kind of direction of what you would generally find in like Irish grain whiskey, even though this has no grain. All of the spot whiskeys are single pot still, and I believe are made from 100% barley, which is, I believe, the case with single pot still. I could be wrong, but that is generally the case. So you have malted barley, and also, because it's Ireland, a good percentage of unmalted barley, which gives it some of those more cereally kind of notes. But yeah, gets brittle, then gets this distinct amount of pepper. It's very on the tongue, peppery, like tingle, kind of like, I refer to it as like a peppery dance. Glides across the tongue with ease. You get some tannins, and some of the flavors get a little darker and just kind of take up the space of your mouth, like the vapors. You can feel this whiskey as it sits. Just to get incredibly pretentious. You then kind of, it becomes a little bit more based into like spice, kind of like wood tannins almost. If you're really thinking about it, I've been able to get like vanilla frosting intermediately throughout this whole experience. Dried strawberries, almost like the dust from them. Peach and pear skin. Although I'm going to go back to the nose. I sort of get what I refer to. I wrote it down as bananas Foster. And it's not so much as like the whole dish, but like a caramelized banana that isn't so much sweet, but has been slightly burnt. Although that could just be kind of like related to like the caramel kind of notes. It doesn't really go into the direction of like a bourbon brown sugar note. And I almost get like this weird note sometimes of like at the bottom of a at the bottom of a wine bottle, at the bottom of a bottle of red wine specifically, you kind of get like sediment. And this very much smells like just the sediment. I am now getting a little bit of that like leather note appearing first and foremost in the palate for the first time, which is interesting. The finish is interesting and also disappointing. So you have the peppery kind of bite continue. Some of the flavors continue to get a little dark, and it continues to fade, but you also kind of get oaky tannin kind of like lingering on the tongue. And before it fades away, I get a small amount of peanut butter, and a little bit of like a freshly baked biscuit as it's like drifting away. As I think I've said at the start of this video, somewhere in the course of this video, deep inside of this nose, you can get hints of like the classic Irish shortbread cookie. But it's just a hint. It's not, it's very little. But yeah, how does it stack up to the other whiskeys? And we're going to try and blow through this as quick as possible. But right in front of me, I have Green Spot aged in Bordeaux wine barrels, Yellow Spot, and some more Red Spot. And what is often the case in Irish whiskey is no matter what it was aged in, you'll have very little color difference. And I'm trying to demonstrate that without really dropping anything, which is a little hard, but yeah. So if you looked at this, you wouldn't be off your rocker to be like, hey, did you pour the same whiskey in the same glasses? Did you pour the same whiskey, Jeffrey, and then forget how to talk? No to the first one. So, with traditional Green Spot, it runs the price range of $35 to $65. This runs a little more because it's harder to find. And yeah, I wouldn't say this is... There's some heavy inflation on this, and you can find it for over $100. However, it's also somewhat rare, so I do in fact recommend it. But if you look at the price of what it is on like Whiskey Exchange, I think it's like only $53, something like that. So keep that in mind, although shipping. But just between Green Spot and Yellow Spot, the Green Spot is immediately just caramel, like just insanely out of the glass caramel. This is a little more like vanilla sweet, a tinge of like sherry, kind of like almost almond. But between the two, I definitely like the Green Spot more. And between Green Spot and Red Spot. So this has a distinct, like, toasty oak nose right now, comparatively. Still just, like, crazy with that caramel. Like, warmed sandpaper almost. Sand. Probably what it would smell like to get Turkish coffee. So yeah, traditional Green Spot will run you $35 to $65. Yellow Spot will run you $75 to $100. And Red Spot can run you anywhere from a little under $100 all the way up to $150. Now, I love Red Spot. It's a fantastic whiskey. You can get a lot better product for way less money. And if you do want just to compare, because I've had these all for about the same time, the Green Spot is probably the one I've had the longest, but yeah. Okay, so Green Spot to Yellow Spot, practically very, very similar in terms of the labeling. Just kind of no frills, but to the point. Haven't really had that much. have had a little more of the yellow spot, but the one that I've really enjoyed is the red spot, primarily because of how difficult it was to find it. And if you do happen to find any of these, I would recommend a very weird thing of smelling the insides of the container. Specifically, this has almost like a toasted sandalwood vibe. Like sawdust almost, and a little bit of peach, which, you know, very interesting and impressive. So if you like Irish whiskey and are a big spender, but not enough of a big spender where you could jump straight to the Middleton releases, such as Barry Crockett or something, you know, go for some Red Spot, or go for some Redbreast, who are also whiskey bonders in the Irish whiskey bonding business. Bingo bonanza. My name has been Jeffrey Patrone. I highly recommend that you subscribe to the channel, but you don't have to. Give this video a big old thumbs up or a big old middle fingered comment in the comment sections below. In the comment section below, telling me there's only one comment section, and also this video was over 30 minutes long. What are you doing? Have a great day.